What's happening in the HR consulting space? So this is actually a very interesting one for us as consultants to talk about, because what we're going to share with you is some of our observations around what's broken and what needs to change moving forward, as well as even, and I'll be very transparent here, what we at Knowledge Infusion think we need to do differently moving forward compared to where we've been over the last 5 years. So one of the, I think, really interesting things about HR consulting, you can move to the next slide, Jason, is that when we go into organizations, one of the things that we hear a lot from our customers is, well, a consultant told us to do that, or a consultant told us to automate our talent management processes. That's probably one of the most common kind of issues that we hear in our customer base. And one of the interesting things about that is that organizations today are saying, wow, you know what? All of that advice that we've gotten over the years around automation or digitizing our HR processes and digitizing our HR function hasn't necessarily evolved the HR function. So one of the things that we're starting to see is that organizations are starting to get more mature when it comes to understanding what's really needed. So one of the things that we think needs to happen from an HR consulting perspective is much more of a focus on outcome as opposed to solution. So how many of you, I want to see a show of hands, how many of you have worked with consultants, whether it be consultants from your vendors, consultants, even KI, I'm not going to ask you to name names, that have been too solution focused and not outcome focused enough? We see it all the time. So I think that's one of the things that we're starting, which I think is a very good thing to see, that I think that buyers, that organizations are starting to get more mature and understand it's not about the solution, it's about the outcome. One of the other things that we're seeing is that, and this is an observation, I've been in the HR technology space for over 20 years, and one of the things that I can honestly say is we have never ever been at a point in time where the pace of change in both HR, in terms of what HR is trying to accomplish, as well as technology, has moved any faster. So I think it's very, very exciting. And if I look at our average, I'm just going to throw it out there, talent management customer and what they're trying to do today versus what they were trying to do 5 years ago, light years apart. So that means that organizations are being forced to keep up very, very quickly, and it's really challenging. How do you do that? I mean, we even as consultants, we put a huge focus on the development of our people in order to keep pace and keep ahead of change. So this is one of the things that we're seeing that organizations struggle with more and more all the time. So from an HR perspective, trying to do, no longer focusing on things like performance management and succession planning, which is kind of that, tried and true HR processes and the way HR has always functioned, but really much more focused on, okay, what do we need to do to deliver business results? And it's not better performance reviews, and it's not having a clean slate of a succession plan. Most business leaders say that's not necessarily going to get me the talent and the people that I need to execute to my business goals. It's breaking down. So one of the things from a consulting perspective, one of the things that means is looking for, whether it be from your vendors, the consultants from your vendors, or any consultants that you work with, looking at transformative thinking, because that's what HR is being called upon to do. So I think that's really important. Jason, anything?
Yeah, I was just going to add, Heidi and I, when we started this, we didn't come from the consulting background. We came from a product background, and one of the things that's fascinating about that position is that you don't have those old paradigms built into yourself. In fact, you're trying to not think that way, because Mary Leahy, as a customer of ours at PeopleSoft, would come to corporate headquarters out in Pleasanton and say, guys, we're live, but this still isn't doing what I want it to do. We're live, but this still isn't the outcome that I'm looking for. So, that being said, go live isn't the measure of success. What is the measure of success? That's what you guys need to help, or we need to help you, or you need to define before you start, so that at the end of it, you say, wow, now I've actually reached my success. And it's not, I finally got the PeopleSoft LMS live, and I'll never forget the calls with Paul. I get this PeopleSoft LMS in and things like that. What's live versus what's success? And they're two completely different things. So we have consultants in our organization that challenge Heidi and I all the time. It's like, let's just make them live. Let's just get them live. Like, no. At the end of the day, that's not going to be what drives the stickiness. That's not going to be what drives the value. It's how you're actually measuring the outcomes, what your outcome is. And then back to these guys, my invisible panel here, later on, they're going to talk about how do you measure outcomes. So once you set that outcome, how do you then measure it so you can go back to your board or go back to the people that gave you the millions of dollars to do this and say, see, here's the outcome, more shoe sales. Here's the outcome, more subscribers, more spenders on kids' breakfasts, quote unquote.
What are some of the things that we think you should be thinking about? So Jason already talked about this laser focus on outcomes. One of the things I would challenge you all to do is push your vendors to think and respond this way as well. Unfortunately, the way that the vendor services model and their business models are set up, they're very much focused on go live. Their success from a vendor perspective is very often defined as getting you live on budget and on time. When in reality, we see organization after organization fail to achieve any of their strategic goals with their technology, with that type of methodology. So one of the things we encourage you to do is to push your vendors to A, slow down, B, understand the outcomes that you're looking to drive, and C, ensure that they're willing to be a good partner with you as you drive towards an implementation that's outcome-based versus just simply going live. And we see a lot of friction when we work with vendors who want to push through and railroad through an implementation and don't necessarily have the model to support the work, the heavy lifting that's involved in making the tough decisions around defining your global process standards, as an example. Not an easy process to work through. So that's one thing to really think about. Another thing is question the norm. One of the things that really is very frustrating is that we see organizations, whether it be vendors, whether it be HR, or whether it be consultants, far too focused on how things have been done historically. So one of the things, for those of you who've worked with Knowledge Infusion for some time, we very much focus on transformation versus optimization. And there's a fundamental difference, and those sound like just big consulting words. So, underneath that, what that means is start with a blank slate. Think fresh, think new. Don't simply adopt. Don't take what you've done and simply tweak it and make it better, because with the way that HR has developed its processes over the last 20 years, they don't work for the workforce of 2011. So truly, truly step back and think fresh and force those that you're working with, whether it be consultants or whether it be your vendors, to do that same thing with you. One of the really positive things that's come out of all the kind of chaos around core HR and what does Fusion mean and where's the future of PeopleSoft going and is Workday ready and all of that discussion that's taken place over the last 3 years, I think organizations have gotten much, much smarter than they were 5 years ago about when's the right time to actually do an upgrade. 5 years ago, we heard the typical response was, well, we're on X release, we're on 8.9, so we need to upgrade next year. Today, most of our customers are saying, and Mary, you were the latest, 9.1's not going to get us anything, so why go to 9.1, PeopleSoft 9.1? What is it going to get? What are we going to achieve and move forward as an organization, as opposed to it just staying current with technology? So I think that's been a positive shift in the industry. And the last thing that I want to point out here, because I think it's really important as you think about your HR technology implementations, there's far too much focus today in the industry on what I'm going to call application configuration or application-specific implementation. All the vendors want to talk about how they're going to implement their particular software, and far too little focus on the entire ecosystem within which that application needs to exist. So integration up to the portal, down to the business intelligence layer, and then across functions, whether it be back to core HR or even application to application, such as, say, Taleo or from a talent acquisition, SuccessFactors for performance management. Vendors won't take you there. Many consultants won't take you there. We've developed as an industry the consultants who are actually doing the implementations are very kind of focused and application-centric in their knowledge and the way that they think about HR technologies. But push your vendors, push your consultants, ensure that your teams are thinking, and we call it kind of a 360-degree view, which is integration across from a functional perspective and up and down from a presentation layer and business intelligence and reporting. So that's one thing we're seeing not nearly enough in the industry, and want to make sure that you guys are out ahead and thinking along those lines.
I think in no organization in the world today is a single technology what's used. You know, whether it's I'm using a Microsoft portal on top of PeopleSoft or Oracle, you know, or whether I'm using LinkedIn as a way to recruit, you know, through an API. I mean, there's never one technology ever that's going to solve all of HR and human capital management's issues. As much as some vendors would like that to be the case, it'll never be the case, especially as we try to provide unified front ends to employees to drive adoption.
The next topic we want to talk about is automated talent management, now what? So one of the things that we're seeing is a lot of organizations have spent a lot of time, money, resources, energy implementing talent management solutions over the last 5 to 10 years and are now saying, wow, what's the value that we're getting from this? What do we need to do now to continue to evolve? So the first thing that we're seeing is an increased focus on what we're calling outputs and measures, which is really much more of the focus of, so we have all this data now. What do we do with it? So what? It's the so what factor. I mean, ultimately, talent management solutions should be viewed as a decision support solution as opposed to a process automation solution. Unfortunately, the history of HR and the way that they've gone about selecting and implementing talent management solutions is far too little focus up front on outputs and measures. So now we're starting to see organizations step back and say, okay, we now have the data. As we suspected, we've given a little bit to the business, and now the demand and that appetite is greater than ever. So we're seeing a significant increase in workforce planning and workforce analytics initiatives, which we're going to talk about today on the panel. But as part of that, because of that demand for decision support, organizations are also saying, wait a second, time out. We don't necessarily have the data in our systems that we need to effectively drive the levels of decision making that we need in the organization. So the correlative of the focus on the outputs and the measures is the focus on the inputs. Inputs, everything from, and I'm going to use a customer example. We had a customer who had 2 different solutions for recruiting and performance and succession and wanted to consolidate on one platform. When they implemented performance and succession, they made the mistake, and had nothing to do with the vendor, it had everything to do with the way they implemented the system. They didn't do the heavy lifting to define their valid table values. And so they basically went with kind of a free-for-all open text model, and everyone could put whatever data they wanted in their performance and succession plans and their talent reviews. And surprise, they couldn't get the data out of the system that they wanted. Now that's an extreme example, but in every single organization we work with, we see that to a certain degree, saying, wow, you know what? We kind of have a competency model, but it really isn't getting at what our business leaders need to know about our people. So what is that data? What is that information we need to know about our people? And one example, we're seeing a lot of organizations start to implement critical experience models versus competencies. So I want to know what you did. For example, what kind of global experience do you have? What's your span of control in your background? How many employees have you managed? Have you had an operations experience, financial experience, people management experience in your background? And only when you have those right combination of experiences can we think of you as someone who's eligible to move into a certain type of role. So that's an example of focus on the data, as well as the core HR becoming, and the data quality within the core HR system is now also, I'd say, coming under a lot more increased focus and pressure. The other common mistake that I think HR makes when it comes to service delivery is they think about the service delivery model entirely from an HR point of view. The most common example of this for me is compensation versus payroll. For all of us in the HR world, those are 2 very distinct departments, very distinct systems, very distinct business processes. From an employee's perspective, not so much. All they know is I'm getting a paycheck, and it impacts my bottom line. So when HR typically sets up any type of portal and as they think about employee experience, those 2 areas are very often bifurcated, and that makes no sense from an employee perspective. So think about developing your service delivery model from a worker-centric point of view, think about, and I deliberately say worker, not employee, because service delivery also needs to be inclusive of your candidates and that candidate experience as they are onboarded and flow into the organization, even alumni, and then contingent workers as well. So really get outside of HR, look at service delivery from that worker perspective. Contingent labor, this is something that we're seeing a lot of HR organizations starting to say, we need to think differently about what our role is relative to contingent labor. So I think the statistic is roughly 60%, 60 to 65% of the average organization's spend, labor spend, is on contingent labor versus employee labor. So that's a huge spend that's coming out of the organization that's today not managed. So the question is, from a service delivery perspective, what is HR's responsibility in delivering services to that contingent pool? Leading organizations actually are now pushing HR to be responsible for that and say, we need to ensure that those workers have a good employment experience as a contingent worker and have a baseline set of process standards and information as they come into the organization. And that's rapidly becoming part of the HR function. So what are some of the things you need to do? Obviously, expand your definition of service delivery. It's not just HR transactions. It's certainly not just setting up an HR service center. It's much broader than that. It includes everything from how do you push information out to employees, how do employees pull information. So it's not just push, but it's push and pull. Through to how and when do your centers of excellence get involved in what types of situations. Talent management, I can't encourage you enough to go back and force your talent management counterparts to think through the service delivery model as they go about implementing a talent management solution. And really be very, very prescriptive and say, okay, what are we going to put online? Where are we going to put it? What makes sense? Are there other things that we're not, it's not just the system, it's not just a link to the system, but all of the decision support documentation, the e-learning, the how to deliver a performance review, what the tips and tricks from a talent management perspective, ensure that you're including that. And then all the way through to, how is that employee going to escalate if the service center or their generalist can't necessarily give them the support that they need?
The next thing is, we built our house before we knew what it was going to be used for. And we see this over and over again, where organizations actually did a deployment of a technology, but for whatever reason, things have changed, right? And we talked about that. Things always change. So once again, we see a major shift from a legacy interface to true web service integrations. Once again, all of the vendors offer web service integrations today. Am I still uploading files via comma-separated values? Am I still putting stuff onto an FTP site and hoping that it flows in overnight? While that might work, quote unquote, at the same time, it's labor intensive. And it's not agile as you guys start to move into more of this web services model. I talked about the HR function continues to get less support from IT, simplification of where data is stored. So do I really have to have the data stored in 19 places? Or could I have it stored in one place and pull all of my information from that? One of the things we do with organizations a lot during a data audit is ask how many times is name entered? And how many times does employee name get entered? And it should be 0. It should get entered at the applicant process and never entered again. The applicant should enter it. So in your world, how many is it? Is it 0? Is it 1? As you bring data over from recruiting into core HR, is your pipe that you're bringing over rich with talent data, or is it just enough to get the person paid? 90x%, it's just enough to get the person paid, and all of that other talent data sits back there in the recruiting system and can't be used going forward from a talent standpoint. Fewer solutions will be leveraged, and for the overall portfolio, which means I need to start thinking about these talent management suites, a core HR suite. What am I going to use? And then how am I going to get the data out of it? And I think that this last bullet is really important for me. I know it's really important for me, realization that HR is ripe for process integration across its function more than integration across the enterprise. So when you think about when the ERPs came out, they said, hey, we're going to tie HR to financials to supply chain. And that was a great, grandiose goal, and I'm the biggest hypocrite in the world from my background standing up here saying that, coming from an ERP space. But one of the things that we forgot was we forgot to tie HR together before we tied HR to these other things. So I still had all of these separate HR silos, which are great. I was able to digitize, but I forgot to tie HR together before I actually thought about how I could tie that back in to the rest of the organization. So I truly think people are taking a step back and have to and say, how do I make sure HR is integrated first, then think about how can I tie it into the rest of these business data areas. So audit and revise your blueprint on a forward basis. Think about adoption and measurement versus go live of any project you're doing. And please just take what I said baseline. When you start to lose weight, take a before and after. Before I did this, what was going on? After I did this, what's now the value? And it's not a go live. It's a what's the outcome? What is the outcome that's happening? And then think ahead. This is the other thing I see is we see organizations doing these Band-Aids. Well, if I just do this upgrade, I can get through the next year, and then maybe something else will come out. Think ahead and start to say, maybe I need something for 3 years. Maybe Oracle or SAP or Workday is not going to have something for the next 3 years. Don't stall your organization for 3 years. Think about how do I put a SaaS solution in there for 3 years and then go backwards. And maybe by then, your core system, you'll be able to bring things together. Or by then, the world looks completely different. But keep being agile in those areas. Talent automation versus talent management. We talked a lot about this, Heidi. Some few things you want to touch on there?
Yeah, I think that this point down here. So one of the things that it continues to amaze me, and I think it's representative of how vendors and technology are slow to evolve, is how focused vendors are on processes that I would consider are traditional HR processes versus the processes which are driving a lot of the talent management initiatives. So if we go into our customers and what we hear that they're really trying to accomplish in terms of their outcome, they're looking to develop global talent pools. They're looking to increase mobility across the organization. They're looking to be able to search their internal and external talent to find the person who speaks Mandarin, has the right leadership experience, and is willing to relocate to China to open up their office. What does HR traditionally fall back on? Those traditional talent processes that we're comfortable with, that applications have been built around, et cetera. So really encourage you to think differently and outside of the box. And it takes creative thinking. It takes really good, careful listening to the business to understand what is it that they really need. And then it takes diligence and holding yourself to a high level of accountability to not fall back on the performance, succession, career planning, recruiting model that we've all grown up in.
And the workforce changes so fast. This is how you need to understand from a business standpoint where the business is going, and then start to say, how can I creatively think about these talent pools? Start to look across all of your businesses and understand how you can leverage resources, and then what are those critical roles going forward?
So one other quick point here, which I think gets far too little attention in the talent management discussion, is increasing manager capability. So even though most of us in this room are responsible for some level of HR operations, HR systems, and you may not directly be responsible for learning and development, ensure that your counterpart, your peers, your teams are focusing on, as you roll out any type of talent management systems or new processes, new technologies, that you're also including really meaningful manager training and development, not on the system, but on how to manage their people better, how to have a career conversation, how to have a performance discussion, how to really give good coaching and feedback on an ongoing and daily basis. That's what's going to actually get your managers excited about the system. It's not the actual inputting of data for the performance review or sitting down blindly and having a performance discussion with HR, not having provided them with any better tools so that they personally know how to be better at this conversation than I was, hopefully it's not just last year, but in some cases last year. And that's just, I think that we've seen a lot of organizations put a lot of resource into talent management solutions while forgetting about the manager. So make sure that that's part of your overarching talent management plan.
The workforce. We know the workforce has changed how, where, and work gets done. Increase in use of the virtual workforce. Please embed millennials in your thinking. We have an amazing employee at Knowledge Infusion named Patrick Dodge. Patrick is a millennial through and through. And one of the things I love about Patrick is he says, that's not the way people think anymore. I'm like, yes, I'm old. I realize it. But we're all, I'm not saying we're all old, but we're all set in certain ways that we grew up. It's like me telling my 6-year-old to put the phone on the hook, and he's like, what hook? We constantly have to be reminded that the millennials think differently and keep them involved. They should be involved in every process. Even if they have nothing to do with HR, put them on a team and watch them think, because you have to make sure that you include them in what you're doing. Increased need to track non-employee information, HR attention on supporting mobile and the mobile workforce, continued use of text messaging and collaborative technologies. In this area, I just say prepare and watch, because 1 year changes this whole thing. The technologies that are out there today that people are using from a social standpoint, think about those things and how do you keep the technologies in place. Enterprise collaboration, when you think about collaboration, the initiatives will occur and are occurring within every organization. So social networking, or whatever you guys decide to call it, we call it enterprise collaboration just so HR doesn't think it's social, quote unquote, and gets out of that term. Every organization's doing it. HR needs to be involved in it. So find your IT pocket where it's happening and figure out how to get involved and on that committee that's working on it. Most of the collaboration projects will still be skunkworks and fail. Vendors will continue to discuss social media at every chance. So when you see vendors come in and present to you, their collaboration and social media stuff looks cool, right? Everyone agree it looks cool. This will be the hardest thing that HR has ever rolled out. Social media. No doubt. Because you've got 5 different technographics of people working together. You have people that are afraid to talk. You have others that are open to talk. You're trying to put in place processes that everyone might use. And as you look at that going forward, it's, hey, cool, the vendor's got it, but am I truly going to use it? Am I truly going to get people to use it? How am I going to put the change management in place to get people to use it? It is a big, big question. So it looks really cool, but I warn you that there's very few organizations that are actually doing it, even though it looks cool in the quote-unquote demo. So stay on top of that. The last thing is the end of the HRIS department. So I personally, and our organization, we personally don't believe that the HRIS department will continue to exist. That the function will change and needs to change its name, and it needs to change its function to be much more process and technology focused versus information services focused. And what does that mean? It has to shift from technical programmers to business and strategic focus. It has to reskill itself to focus on processes and integration of processes, not on coding and development. It has to own governance. That group has to own governance, how decisions are made. It has to understand the overall HR strategy and set the succession application measures towards success. And it has to include, like we talked about, portals and business intelligence. So the HRIS function was necessary back in the old days to write reports. The HRIS function was necessary back in the old days to write, interfaces. As you go forward, how do you, in HR, elevate this role to a much more strategic function and then use IT as your support mechanism to serve and support you in those functions. Instead of trying to build these HRIS empires, quote unquote, that allow you to not be as agile as you need to be to continue to grow what you're trying to do. So that was a lot of stuff to cover in a short period of time. Was it helpful to discuss? As you look, you guys will get a copy of this presentation, take it back and rethink about it. We'll continue to re-look at how we do. I mean, Heidi and I just do these as trends. You know, we continue to look back year over year and say, were we right, were we wrong? You know, the reason we don't call these fads is because we don't think it's just a quick thing. It's going to be gone in 3 months. You know, we really believe this is the future of the market and where the market is going today.